So here we are today to talk about shading and vertical NFT systems. So we're going to cover 4 different kinds. So I've got these 4 basic kinds of vertical ways to build your NFT system. Walls and towers, kind of more similar, versus A-frames and lean-tos, also a little more similar. Let's see how they compare against each other when it comes to, again, shading and their overall gain on productive ground. So if we were to start with a wall configuration, just going vertically, no depth here, our gain on the ground surface is just this first layer, right? Any square footage taken up by this wall would be able to grow plants on the ground as well. So here we have this same area taken up by the wall, a top-down view, just accounting for the square footage. Let's say we could fit 4 lettuce plants or 4 any plants across this range. If we're looking down on it and we have this area, then we build that wall up. For every layer of that wall, switching to the side view here, for every layer of that wall, we're gaining a staggered set of plants. So 4 becomes 7, 11, 14, 18. We add 4 levels and we've got more than a 4-fold increase. 4 times 4 is 16, so we've got more than 4 times as many plants in this same area due to a wall type. And again, for NFT, so all this water for the NFT irrigation is coming in, running through all these plants. Sorry to make the adjustment. This was our front side facing it, so if we switch to another side view, a side view of the side, and we have these plants poking out along the face of the tower, where we can see this solid configuration gives us a great vertical gain. However, there is no room for any sunlight to be passing through. All of this sunlight is stopping at the wall. There's no transmission, no transmittance to the section behind. So ultimately, the amount of shade cast by a wall structure is of course determined by how high that wall structure is. The gain on this square footage here, the more than 4-fold gain on number of plants in the same footprint has to be balanced against the shade by this sun here. Because the only sunlight making it past this tower is from the very top of the system. So there's a very direct relationship between the height of the wall and the setback before the next wall if you were to run multiple of these systems. However, that points out that the real gain, the real benefit, the application for walls, wall-type vertical NFTs, is on walls. So if you have this broad open area, you don't want to be creating all this dead space. However, if there was a building here, then it's perfect because it's already dead space, it's already not growing any plants. And there you go. Best application for a wall-type structure, gaining production advantage on its square footage for every level that you go up, giving no sunlight transmissions, and so best applied to a place where there's already a dead space without plant growth beforehand. So maximizing our use of perhaps a very minimum footprint allowed for production. So let's move on to tower production. Similar, but a twist on this wall type. A final benefit to tag on to the wall type production is that since it pairs so well with building on the faces of buildings, on walls themselves, is that it's been found, this type of production style has been found to reduce the heat on a building surface by about 8 degrees centigrade, and that, of course, decreases the energy load on the building and so reduces the energy need for the building itself and helps to combat heating in the urban environment. Now, let's move on to the tower type structure, which is similar to, but a twist on, the wall construction. With the tower type, we've just taken a slice out of this wall and made a tower. We've reduced the footprint tremendously, and we're fitting a little bit more than a plant across the square footage, because on the ground we might be able to fit a plant here and then part of a plant on what's left, but maybe not all of it. And then of course we get the gain on the wall from going up in levels, but as you notice in these numbers here, they're skipping. because it's actually twirling around this tower like a corkscrew. We're going up, we have the first plant, the second plant, third and fourth would be on that side near you, and then coming back around fifth, sixth, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. We still have 18, just like across that full wall that was spread across the 4 plants worth of square footage. We're now getting 18 plants on a plant and a half's worth of square footage. Towers bring a benefit over walls in allowing sunlight to pass through. So if we take like a top-down view, this is from the side, right? This was a side view, so we see the height of the tower. Now if we take a top-down view and we see these towers scatter in a checkered board across the production space, we can see that sunlight, depending on which angle it's coming from, even if it's coming from directly to the south, then we see that we've got light hitting this tower being blocked and not transmitting beyond, right? Same over here, light hitting this tower not being transmitted beyond. But then we've got light coming through this gap in the towers where a wall, of course, is a wall. Now we have light coming through and lighting this tower. And just the nature of light, diffuse and all that, it can kind of come through and be hitting multiple towers. Or let's say, if the sun was at a bit more of an angle, we'd still get light hitting this tower, light coming through, hitting this tower, light hitting this tower. So we've really opened up our possibility to have the same number of plants on a smaller footprint and then replicate that, be able to stack them a bit more deeply, since these towers are letting light through in a way that a wall never could. The last thing to note, of course, as you may have seen from this diagram already, is that the plants on the far side of the towers tend to be much more shaded. And so with tower production, you can spiral them all the way around, but unless you are turning the towers, which some people do, unless you are turning the towers, you're losing out, or at least you have slower production on half of your production space. It can still be very much worth it. Some people will just use that as kind of like a nursery zone and transplant them. After they crop out the sunny side, they'll move the shady side to the sunny side and then put them in the lower side. Or like I said, they can rotate, have these towers on rotation so that each plant gets its fair and equal share of the sunlight. All right, moving right along, we're coming to A-frames. Viewed head on, A-frames look a bit like bleachers with the plants just arranged along these rows, each one lifted up above the one in front and below it. However, when we come to the side, this is where we get its namesake, the A frame, the A resembling frame, the structures holding all those rows arranged, each one lifted above the next on its brace here, on its counter brace here. Sometimes, maybe a little bit more support. But at the end of the day, the A-frame remains. With this kind of setup, it's the size of the plants at maturity that determines the spacing between these levels. So we need the plant to be able to grow out to its fullest without bumping into the one behind it. So that's talking about this spacing here. And of course, every bit that we have to increase the spacing between these rows has a double effect on this A-frame, because if we increase the spacing between here and here, well, that's increasing also the spacing between here and here. And so that's really starting to eat into our advantage of the square footage. Like we had in all the original examples, we've got half the A-frame taking up widthwise the same as 4 plants, but also taking up lengthwise the same as 8 plants, or at least as many number of plants as rows on the A-frame. And so the bigger the plants on this A-frame, the wider these sections need to be spaced apart, the bigger the footprint of the A-frame. That's the point I'm making here. Next point is about the shading. So we'll bring something back in from like when we talked about the walls. Of course, the side of the A-frame facing the sun gets plenty of light. This side facing away from the sun is just like it's behind one of these wall structures. The light comes down, it might hit this highest plant. It's not making it the rest of the way here. And the next bit of light that can make it all the way over the system passes over all these plants and leaves them in the shade. So we've got a shady half of this whole structure. Well, there's got to be a reason that everyone's using these A-frames. It's not like they want to grow half their plants in shade. What it comes down to is just making extra sure with your orientation to this sunlight. Right now, if we have this oriented to where this is the south side, and of course if we're in the northern hemisphere, if this is the south side, that's the side that'll get all the sunlight, leaving this side in shade. We change this orientation, so let's first look at it top-wise. Top-wise for this, it'd have those let's make them 8. The 8 shelves oriented this way, right, with north and south. If we change it around and orient the shelves this way, with the same sunlight orientation, north, south, now all this glorious sunshine, rather than hitting the rising half of the A-frame and leaving the far half in shade, right, like illuminating this and leaving this dark. Now we have all the sunlight coming in and gracing the entire length of these channels and leaving it all in glorious sunshine. All right, the lean-to, the modification of the A-frame, and that's our last structure. Ready? Let's go. So the lean-to, when we start face on, it looks the same as the A-frame. We still have this bleacher style set of stepped risers having plants go higher and set back as they go up. However, if we switch to the side, we'll see something different. No longer do we have that representative A-frame. We have the half of it, a lean-to, half the A-frame. The growing structure is just leaning back and then resting on this here. And just like we've been talking this whole time, this shading setback is determined by the height of the structure itself. So the lowest we need the sunlight to hit is here. We take that up until we reach the height of the next, what would be the next structure. So then if we get two of them, we can see, the setback between the two is relative to the height of the sun and the sun angle coming in, the height of the structure and the angle entering. So we want to make sure that the highest plant over here doesn't block the sunlight from hitting the lowest plant over here. The gain in the productive space has to come from squeezing these plants tighter together sideways by raising them up. So we take what would have been in this space possibly only 3 plants, and because we were able to raise them up instead of 1, 2, 3, we can have 1, and instead of this space, right, instead of this space here, we can put this plant a little higher and have it almost butting right up against it. And so that space is now negligible. There's almost no space left in between them because we're, instead of gaining the space for the plant by putting them above each other. This gain in productive space is related to something even if you don't remember the name, the Pythagorean theorem. So let's just write that out really fast. This is as far as the math's going to go today. So do you recall any of this yet? Pythagorean theorem, we've got a triangle with a right angle, just like we have here, right? Triangle, 90-degree right angle. Pythagorean's theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's just saying that there's a relationship between these sides. For us in our lean-to, that relationship is where C is our productive side, right? C, the long side of the triangle, that's where we're growing our plants. We get more productive space, C goes up, when A goes up. And of course B goes up as well, but A goes up. So when A goes up, C goes up. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there's no best or right way to build a vertical NFT system. There are different ways that people are approaching maximizing their use of square footage, gaining productive space instead of just 4 plants growing 16 plants, and it's gaining productive space instead of 3 plants growing 4 plants, and making the most use of incoming solar radiation. So thanks for listening.